I'm Mike Brilla, host of the Inspired Teacher Podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hello, folks, and welcome to the High Tech Podcast. This is one of your hosts, William Illingworth, joined by my fellow host, Joshua Swartz. How you doing, buddy?
That's right. I'm doing great. It's a High Tech Podcast time, so it's a good time.
We did it.
It's a fun time.
We landed the plane. We are actually, here's the biggest surprise of this evening's, this recording. We're actually recording everything at once. Usually these days, we've been recording an interview and then recording intro, outro.
We're
all over the place.
We're all here. It's at the same time. You're getting the same Will and Josh.
We didn't have to read any notes. We don't have to get fresh on the episode again. We know what
we know it's coming. And you know what's coming? It's the next episode of the Ted Lasso Goes to College series.
What we learned when we learned in this episode is that I actually haven't watched it enough recently. It's actually probably been a month or maybe a month and a half since I've watched it.
Are you even a Ted Lasso fan at this point?
I'll leave.
Yeah. Like, let's get a different Ted Lasso person.
For Robin, who doesn't watch, that was me rolling away in my chair.
Yeah. Ooh. Called her out. Wow. If you're a listener and you don't watch, it's fine. We still like you. Just a little less.
No. We released episode 124 today while we're recording. Episode 124 came out today, and in it is a visual gag. There is a visual joke. In the episode, and Robin came to Josh and she's like, "What was that sad music about?" And he's like, "Did you watch the episode, Robin?"
It was. I feel like either I mentioned that or I told her that she needs to watch the episode to see the gag, and she was like, "Oh, is that what the music was?" And I was like, "You heard the music and you didn't even do anything. It's fine. It's whatever. It's all good."
We're just tongue in cheek. We love you, Robin. You're amazing. You've already been on, I think, last episode.
But a little less than the people who watch on YouTube.
So this week, what you need to be watching, if you're not watching right now, turn off the audio, jump over to YouTube, join us for episode 129, where we're going to talk.
And then leave the audio off and watch us without the audio.
So actually, turn the play on your podcast and then mute the video. And play
reverse reaction.
And now we get both those listens. Thanks. That's great.
That's actually, I like that tactic. I was just going to say, we've intended the podcast to be a silent podcast. Yeah. So it's like a silent movie, but like it's like a silent film, but we're trying something different, calling it the silent podcast format, right? So it's a little different. Oh, I hope you like it. Yeah. Okay. Enough of that. Yes, is the next episode of Ted Lasso Goes to College series, and as Will has said, we are rejoined by the great, the wonder kid himself, you might say. Steve Martinez. Yeah, I'm super excited.
I believe I said Wonderkind.
Yeah, whatever. It's fine.
I'm just playing the gag. It's just a quote.
Yeah,
we're gonna get into Nate. We're gonna take apart Nate with Steve, and I'm pretty excited for the fact that this conversation, like Steve, is the consummate educator, right? So we bring this Ted Lasso thing to him, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm in." And we get into this conversation. Like, I'm excited for you to hear this because we get into it and he just keeps bringing it back to the classroom and how he's actually taught students and all. And Josh and I are just like, dude, keep talking. He's got the ideas. And
except for that time we cut him off early, it was good. No, I'm just joking. We didn't do that.
That was me. I'm so sorry. No, I'm joking.
Yeah, it was fine. Yeah, this is great. I feel like we don't need to say more. Steve Martinez is in the house. We're talking about Ted Lasso. How could it get better on the High Tech Podcast? I don't know. I'm sure there's something. Anyway,
Jason Sudeikis joins us, or
if you're listening, Jason Sudeikis, if you ever want to jump on the podcast, because I know, you need some more. You need more publicity.
You need us, right?
Yeah, you need us. Yeah, that's what it comes down to. No, we're here with Steve Martinez. Enough from Will and I. Let's jump in to Ted Lasso Goes to College.
Not only are we in for another episode in the series on Ted Lasso Goes to College, but we have a good friend back with us, Steve. How are you doing today, Steve?
Good. Thanks for having me back. This is fun. Last time was fun. So I'm really excited. Yeah.
We're gonna make the
Yeah.
most of it. You've
Absolutely.
also got a friend that's currently not in screen, right? We've got some sort of dragon in the room
Yeah.
traipsing about. What's your lizard?
Oh, yes. So that is Heartsease around. She's at
Heartsease? Is
Artsy.
that
Heartsea, and that, so to be clear, my daughter named her.
okay?
That's great. That's all right.
Oh man,
but
I was
yeah,
really hoping you gave her that name, Steve. That would have been much better.
you know, yeah, you're right, but I can't take that credit. So that's all Riley.
That's beautiful.
Naming her first pets.
That's awesome.
Yes. Yep.
We are in the midst of our series. We've got a few episodes around this before and behind us, and we're trying to analyze.
Tear apart. Wow. Analyze.
I couldn't
You can't tear apart. We've
Ted
already made that
Lasso.
clear. Like, yeah, if Will basically loves his wife and Ted Lasso, that's really like the. And in fact, Steve, in case you were curious, Steve, once Will was asked, like, what were his two favorite things? I don't remember which episode this was, so listeners will have to listen. And Will may have said Ted Lasso before his wife. I'm not. He claims order didn't matter, but I'm just saying, Steve. He said Ted Lasso first. That's all.
We all make mistakes, right?
Well, and it's the question of like, how do we pivot? Because sometimes in the moment we pivot in the wrong ways, in the wrong direction.
Sometimes you just own it, you know.
Yeah,
so before we dig in, just to give our listeners, like we've cherry picked our network. We found other Ted Lassians. That's not great. We'll have to find some other.
I liked it. It was a good vibe.
Fan name.
Yeah. It was fine.
But on a scale of 1 to 10, and we'll do the bit. Okay, Will is like a 13, maybe a 15. But like on a scale of 1 to 10, about where would you rate yourself, Steve, as a Ted Lasso fan?
Yeah, so it's gonna be a 7, only because in comparison to other obsessions. So this doesn't like mean that I'm not full on Ted Lasso. Like, I love the show. I thought great writing, great cast, character development. But I have Star Wars characters tattooed on my arm. So like,
yeah,
I think in just comparison, it's not at my Star Wars obsession, nor is it on my like Office obsession either. Like,
okay.
I watch The Office daily, like almost like it's just like a background noise. Helps me go to sleep.
Yeah,
amazing.
That's amazing.
All right, I'm gonna need numbers on both of them then. So is Star Wars a 10 and Office is an 11? Like, what are we working with here?
No, I probably the other way around, right? Like Star Wars is certainly an 11.
Good answer. That was the right answer.
It really is. But like
the fact that Will even put The Office above Star Wars made me a little angry internally. For even it was a hypothetical, and I still inside was a little like, that was a real Sith move. That was
you're
called for.
Well, and just to like, you know, kind of give you a sense of like, everyone knows I'm this thing, right? So you all had Sophie on, you know, early after I. So she randomly sent me a gift, and for I don't know why this character, but it is a mug.
Oh my gosh!
And so this thing is massive. Like, I would not put coffee in this. Or probably I would. So, and then the other thing was like, why Jabba? Like, it was like, Steve, are you getting too fat? Like, was there any kind of like underlying message there? I don't think so. But yeah, so, and that's the thing. All of my work friends, my family, everyone, they're like, that is just Steve's thing. So Star Wars at the
Oh,
top. The Office more of like The Office just comforting. Like I just knowing
Okay.
that it's on in the background makes me
Yep.
feel at
It's
ease.
that pair of underwear with a couple holes in it. Like I'm not getting rid of this pair, you know.
You know,
Right.
I mean,
Same
some
thing.
might describe a comforting thing like that. I'm not sure I would, but like that's I might have used like a blanket, for example. Might have been a comforting example that I had used.
See,
But holy underwear is totally you run
my
with
blanket. This is just off the rails. My blankets that I love like that, Josh, are also holy. They have holes in them. So for
Yeah, it's fine.
me, anything that is sacred and well loved has holes in it because I've
Yeah.
had it for 10 years or 20 years or 30 years.
It happens. But Steve, I get where you're coming from. I don't know if I've said this yet in this series, mainly because breaking the fourth wall, we're basically recording the Ted Lasso Goes to College series in reverse.
In reverse.
So we haven't actually done the first episodes yet. But future Josh and Will may do this later. We'll see. For me, I really like Ted Lasso, but I would probably do the same thing. I put myself at like an 8, maybe a little bit higher, because I don't have The Office in that mix for me. Like I like The Office, but it's not. But like I'm with you in this camp. Like you only have to look at my background to like know for a hot second that like I have Star Wars, like Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. Probably those two things I would be like up above that for me, right?
Yeah.
And I'm in a similar place. Like when people know you like those things, that's when you know, like when you get presents at random about those things, that's when you know it's like a 10 or 11 for you, because other people like know that you love that and they're like, that must be the thing that will get that guy forever. Like that will be like when we don't know what to get them for Christmas, it will be Star Wars related. And that's how I know that like for him it's Ted Lasso, because I'm pretty sure, myself included, multiple people have bought him like Ted Lasso candles.
Wow.
Memorabilia. Yeah. It's a religion for Will.
Well, no, I was going to say something similar. That's like, yeah, that's deep. Well, and then the other thing though is, Josh, to your point, there's so much to consume with movies and TV and pop culture, to where if it's something I watched all the way through, it's good. Because there's certain things I'm like, no, I'm not even, that's kind of good, but I don't have time to finish that. So if it's something that I subscribe to, and I'm like, hey, it's a really good show, that means it's good, like at some level. Otherwise, it won't even have my attention.
100%. For me, the reverse of that is I really think it's good if I refuse to watch it on my other monitor while I'm playing a video game or doing work. Like if I have to watch it on the TV downstairs and cannot do other things, that means it's good, right? Like that means that's something that I really like. And I would put Ted Lasso in that category. That became that thing for me. For sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It gets your full attention. It deserves your full attention.
It deserves, like when Will and I watch Lord of the Rings on a yearly basis, it's a little offensive if somebody brings something to do something else during that time, even though we've seen it like a billion times, like to the point that I know exactly what the extended edition scenes are. Like it's the.
He's like, hey, get up, the disc's about to change. I'm like, I know now. I know the
for
disc.
Break.
I've learned the disc.
We're getting there. It's almost time to change.
Exactly.
It's almost time.
All right.
Exactly.
So we've got our fairly well-established nerd lore mix here across us. Great. You are accepted. Anybody, I don't know, if someone responds to us and says like a 6, I might just cancel the episode. I might just like kick them. It's I think there's a 7 or higher floor for me. Like you've got to have a 7 love of Ted Lasso to be here. So welcome. You are welcome in our midst. Thank you. This episode we're going to dig into Nate and what we can learn from Nate in the podcast, and what we can learn from him in education. We did a little bit of prep talk ahead of time, so we've got a good sense of like what's going on with Nate across his arc. But does anybody, do you have a launching point, Josh, or should I?
Yeah, sure. I think when we think of Nate, what I find interesting is his character, of course, is, I think the starting point is really actually the overall arc that he experiences as a character. Like, for me, like, he's an interesting character in the story that it was kind of unexpected for me in a show like this, where, like, because in Ted Lasso, Will and I comment on this a bunch. I don't know if you feel this way, Steve, but, like, the thing that always sets Ted Lasso apart for me is that, like, they'll have those, like, dramatic moments that other shows will have where, like, somebody does clearly something stupid, but, like, in Ted Lasso, that person just doesn't do that. They end up just being a person instead of, like, instead of a weird, like, CW sitcom character, you know what I mean? Like, who's like, I should tell this person I'm angry, but I'm not going to. Instead, I'm gonna sleep with their mom. Like, that's
Right.
on those shows.
Left field.
Yeah, like in Ted Lasso, you don't have that. So it's interesting to me with Nate's character is that there is kind of this, like, unspoken drama that happens with Nate's character, but I think it happens a little bit differently. And I think if we're going to talk about Nate, we have to, and what we can learn in education, I think we have to understand why Nate happens, like why Nate becomes what he does, right? Because I think for a lot of us, we look at Nate and we go, well, he's like the Padawan to Ted. Ted did a lot of stuff for him. What a jerk, like, to turn this direction. But I think is interesting about what they do with Nate's character is really, at the end of the day, what happens with Nate's character is that, like, Nate has this insane low view of himself, and Ted builds him up in season 1, right? But then Ted, not, I think, intentionally not, like, ignoring Nate, kind of lets Nate to his own to do his thing, and Nate kind of sees that because of that, like, hole that he has, sees that as him being abandoned, and it leads him into this kind of this flow of going to people who will build him up, but, like, in the wrong ways. That's the area we get, like, and we get to see that comes a little bit from his dad and his father and some of the relationship they have, and eventually that, you know, in TV magic way gets healed later on. But, like, to me, like, that's the core dynamic of Nate that I find is interesting. I'm curious if you guys think that's like, your take is similar on that, or, well, like, you have some different perspectives
off of that right there. My first question is Nate Anakin or Ahsoka? Like, that's what I'm wrestling with here, right? Like, because Nate has this, like, setup situation. He's good guy. He's going through the Jedi training, and then he stabs his back on on the Jedi, and he does Order 66. Like Nate actually has a very Star Warsian arc, but he doesn't die. He doesn't lose to Obi-Wan necessarily. They actually avoid that. They avoid him losing to Richmond at the end of the series. Like, everyone kind of assumes that Nate's got to lose at the end for redemption, and the redemption happens before that big loss. I think that might be a Star Wars connection that I wasn't expecting. But
yeah, thank you for translating that for me. But okay, so I think that everything that Josh, like, everything that you said is, like, on point with what I'm thinking, or what I was thinking going into this episode, and that is kind of just piggyback on that, is the conversation is not so much Nate as an individual, but Nate's surroundings, his atmosphere, like, everything that, like, it's kind of like, when you're teaching and you have a student be like, why is that kid that way? And instead of being like, no, I just don't like that kid, you figure out what those demons are at a certain level. You figure out, like, why is that student, why is that student not turning in my work? Or why is that student back talking me, right? So, like, and for
Yeah.
Nate, like, if you look at, like, his relationship with his dad, you look at even when he was, like, up and coming, everyone wants to be successful. Even, like, the people that you think are like, that person will never amount to anything, they still want to be successful at a certain level. The problem is how they get treated on their journey to success. Because once they get there, that's really telling, and it really motivates them to oh, I'm here now, but now I'm this
this thing or this kind of this egotistical kind of person doing the things not necessarily for the people around them, but for themselves, right? And that's kind
Yeah.
of the big part of Nate when he does reach that level of success. So again, to me, it's like product of your environment kind of thing. And it's I think for me, such a powerful way to handle that character, because you're right. It's really gray. It's really nuanced. It's not like good or bad. Right. So I do think
Right.
that Nate is a little bit more of an Anakin if Anakin just kind of got his act together a little bit.
If Anakin didn't run an entire empire, then kill a lot of people, and then really only turn around when his son was about to die. Like basically, if after Revenge of the Sith, he turned around not too long after that. Like was basically oh, I was wrong, Obi-Wan, I'm gonna come back.
And that's where it's kind of like that. It's like I'm starting with that like lost Padawan approach, that like everybody even looks at Nate as Ted's acolyte at first. Like he responds immediately to him. He's present with him. He helps because Beard is like his shaman. I don't know. Beard is like over Ted's shoulder, right? And then Nate is this like acolyte, he's this new follower who's coming up under his wing. So it feels more like a Padawan. And I just don't know which Padawan he really ends up being, because he didn't, thankfully, murder planets worth of people, right? We don't have that side of Nate.
Let's talk about how that would have been the craziest end to season 3 of Ted Lasso. Like
what? Not
like a Death Star comes out of like
no. In the episode, right? It's a Beard's wedding, and then there's kind of the Michael Bay lens flare across the screen, and that lens flare pans out, it just backs out to see the Death Star in the background. Like that's the real end of season 3.
But in a serious note, I want to get back to something that you mentioned, Steve, that I think is helpful, right? Is that like it's not just the person, but it's the environment around them. You see that happen, and I think bringing it back to the education piece, right, is that you see that in the final season, right? There's this dynamic going on where like Nate leaves, and the rest of the team, including Beard, basically are like, this is the devil. Like the like Nate is now the epitome of the enemy. Like, right? Yeah, this is most epitomized in their game against each other part of the way through the season, where basically they want to kill the rest of the other team, and it goes horribly bad. But like there's this interesting dynamic with Ted, where like Ted the entire season doesn't really seem to like put Nate in that villainous position. Like he's hurt by what's going on, but like he's always the one kind of like seemingly not wanting to put Nate in that kind of like just black and white villain perspective. And I think there's an interesting dynamic with that, where like I think they're at a certain level, Ted as kind of the guy. We've talked a lot about this on this series at this point, of like Ted and the dynamic and what we can take away from kind of him as a character and learning. There's this dynamic where he like sees Nate as a person, I think, and not as the environment that's going on around him to a certain extent. While he's like hurt by all of this, I think his ultimate goal is to eventually see Nate back, like see that relationship restored. He wants to try to fix that. We see that even in his interactions in that game where he's like trying to talk to Nate. So like for teaching side, I think what kind of stuck with me, and one of the thoughts I was thinking, I'm curious, Steve, like how you've maybe seen this play out, or your thoughts on this, right? Is like, we, like to your point, like we often have those students who, for whatever reason, they're either not engaging in the class, they're not a part of what's going on, they're not those areas, and our reactions can be to be like, just why can't this kid get his act together, or why can't they do this, or we've heard parents and people comment, and people from the outside look and go like, that person's never going anywhere, like, or whatever that comment may be.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and like, but the reality is, I think we learn about this is like, often those people who are doing things, they're not that much different than us either. We all have our own messed up crap that we're dealing with on a regular basis, and our own stuff. But like, to your point, like, one of the things I think we can learn in teaching is to try to like back away and ask ourselves like what might cause a person to be like that, instead of asking what they're doing. Actually ask them, you know, what's causing them to be that way.
And that's I think it's just such a talent for one to be able to do that. And when I say one, I mean an educator. Because I've seen this with teachers, and now like with my, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but now kind of like a side job, I guess. I don't call it a side hustle because I really care about it, but working at a university supporting student teachers, like out in the field, like observing them.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
Giving them feedback. Like the feedback piece is like what I love. Like that's the number one reason why I do it. And kind of just seeing like, you know, different young student teachers dealing with different classroom environments and dynamics, and just seeing like their emotions like kind of puff up a little bit. And it's really hard to be Ted Lasso. Like it's hard to, hey, I'm not, even though like I'm not reacting to this at this level, the surface level. That's what makes Ted a lot more complex than when you first view Ted. Because when you first view Ted, you think he's like, oh, he's just like this kind of cheesy, nice guy. he's a football coach.
Right.
Don't do that in quotes. He's a football coach. But you're right. His ability to see through situations is crazy. And I think that's a lot of why he did have that demeanor or that attitude towards Nate. I'm just like, Nate's going to be okay. I think it's because Ted had so much empathy for every single human, including his wife, right? Ex-wife? Yeah, ex-wife. Like he just has empathy for everyone. It doesn't matter who you are, right? And so Nate was no different in the sense of, I have so much empathy for you that really I just want to make sure that you find your right place, especially considering he's never found it to begin with.
Oh.
Ooh.
Dang.
Hitting it home with the quotes over here.
That for you, my friend. No, an evidence of that is the moment. Now it's killing me. I can't remember if it's end of season 2 or beginning of season 3, but Nate has already gone off. Nate's doing his own thing, and Henry is visiting Ted, and Nate is not sitting with the team in the Lego, thing in the Lego stadium. And Henry goes, "Why is Nate not sitting with you?" And he goes, "Well, things aren't as what, he doesn't try to over explain it, but Henry's just like, "But isn't your friend?" And he goes, "Well, you're right there, aren't you, buddy?" And he just picks him up and puts him down. Like there's an evidence in how Ted's attitude towards Nate is, he may have done it subconsciously. He may have also been putting Nate back further as, oh, it's where Nate is right now. Like he was just trying to be set, but he is able to acknowledge with Henry's encouragement, like, no, nothing's different. Nate's just where Nate needs to be. And he puts him with them sitting in line.
Yeah. It's the beginning of season 3, in case you're curious. That's when that happens, right? It's a Lego set. Just, as a Ted Lasso fan, I thought you would know that, but apparently, us apes over here.
I almost didn't even want to admit it. I didn't even want to admit it at first. I didn't want to say it.
You've seen it so many times that I believe that Ted Lasso just merges together into one entire theme.
I'm due a rewatch, actually. I haven't watched recently, so that's what's.
But Steve, to your point, right, is that like you're right. It's not easy to do that. At one end, like maybe what we need to be encouraging people, right, and to be thinking about is like, I think some of that comes from like, and I'm saying this like I pretend to be an expert at this. I'm not. Like I can even think as we're talking about this like 2 weeks ago in class, something that I said or a look I gave a student that I'm like, I probably should have backed away for a second and thought about why that student's doing that right now, right? Instead of getting a little frustrated with what they were doing. But at the same time, right, like that's some of it, right, is I think like just being willing to slow down and remind ourselves that like each of these students are people. Like at the end of the day, what Ted's doing, like while there is a skill to it, it's not that like mind-blowingly revolutionary. It's that he's pausing to like acknowledge that each person is a person, right? Like at the end of the day, like that's kind of what I feel like he's doing. Now, that's so much easier to say right now, right, than actually do. But like,
and in a TV show, The Perfect World.
yeah, in a TV show, in a perfect world, right? Um, but like
But
that's to me, that's maybe part of what we should be if teaching or striving for it, right? Maybe a little bit. I don't know. I'm curious. It looks like you have a thought, so I'm gonna let you hit that.
But I think I'm thinking this more of like the core reason, right? Like, what is the core reason why that's happening and why that has happened in education? When you think about it,
Yeah.
like the system makes it seem like we're all just another number. And it's really hard to humanize that when we're
Yep.
so busy with standards, when we're so busy with you know, different meetings with when you're looking at like what's expected when you're grading a bunch of papers and like you are not keeping up with things, it's just another paper, it's another score, it's another grade, it's another. So the system makes it where it's hard to humanize this whole thing. And the just talking about it right now is another side hustle I have, if I can use that term, is I teach a night class in my area. It's an adult school. It's my very first time teaching an adult school. I'm in my second semester of it. It's basic computer class, and these learners they all have different goals. It's not graded. It's an enrichment class, but I have a full class every semester so far. So these are people that I've never even touched the keyboard. I've touched the keyboard like 20 years ago, right? They're learning all these things, right? Some of them are working towards their GED, stuff like that. And when you take away all of the grading, because really that class is like you're able to push away the system. I'm like, I'm not grading anything. We're learning a different thing every week. I still feel I'm using like good pedagogy. I'm still using that flipped classroom, right? Like I'm still doing all the things, but it's one of those things where like you take away all that other stuff and they're just there learning. I'm just there teaching, and we have a really good time doing it. And so it's a lot easier. And I know I'm teaching adults in that context. And I'm not saying we go full on like let's not grade anything because that's not, that's not realistic. But I guess my larger point is that because the system really does focus on like this, every student needs a grade, every student needs this, and because we have so much of them, largely speaking, like I had 200 students when I taught high school, right? It's really hard to just humanize all that, right? Like, and so how are you supposed to keep up with that? And really, how are you supposed to remember your original purpose when you have this mountain and mountains of work, standards, alignment? Education has that
There's
pendulum of like which way are we going with things, right? More technology to learn, right? And it just becomes too much. So I think it's a lot of the system that makes it even more challenging.
and what that points towards in Nate's story, right, is we know his redemption comes pretty much as a direct result of him confronting his trauma with his father. It's not picked up or set up in the series as that. Like it's not like, oh, he's had a traumatic issue with his father. Like it's just kind of like little bits here and there, and he looks to Ted like a dad. He's got some patriarchal stuff there, like and then he comes to head with his dad that day where he's playing his violin and his dad walks in and he hears him. He's like, oh, I always loved you. He's like, why didn't you ever tell that to me? In that scene, so much of what is Nate's problem becomes evident. Some of it's been like bleeding in. We could have guessed maybe, right? But he says it. And finally, in identifying that trauma, Nate starts to unveil it and starts to unearth it and confronts it and leads towards healing, comes back to Richmond. What we don't get with our students is that moment where they picture perfectly come into contact with their trauma in a healthy environment and can healthily begin to unpack it, right?
Yeah.
We get our students with all the trauma without any of the resolution. And that's one of, sometimes it's not trauma, but like that's some part of that environment aspect that we see innate that does happen with our students, where we can't change that environment for them necessarily. We can't remove the trauma. We can't help them address the trauma. Sometimes the best we can do is maybe coach them on ways they can deal with it, in their day-to-day, and how they could maybe cope with it while they're in our classroom. But that's one of those things that Nate shows us, and that better than us, with 200 students in 1 year. Like, you can't even imagine the multiplication of trauma across 200 little bodies, 200 little minds.
Yeah. Yeah. And really, if you think about it, if you're talking one school year, that's not that much time to remotely get close to any type of like healing resolution, like as you're talking about, like that. It really that's really not a whole lot of time. So even if there is resolution, because I I do, now that I run into students, now they're adults, and like, oh, Martinez, thanks to your class, I did this, or I think this way,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
they have those positive things to say, and that's really cool. But like we don't get to see that, right? Like they might figure it out 4 years after, 4 years, 5 years later, and maybe we have a small bit of responsibility on that, but like we won't see it normally, right? So that's kind of the other thing. If you're going to compare it to Nate, like, yeah, he finally gets there, but I don't know. Like I think where Nate kind of starts figuring stuff out is starting to see his inability on a social level to just connect with other humans. Like he couldn't even ask a girl out, right?
Right.
But then he
Yeah.
starts to realize, like, wait a second, my dad was kind of the same way. And for some reason, that made it a little bit more all right. We're like,
Yeah.
okay,
Mm.
I kind of get this now. At the very least, I can now tackle this in some way. Because my dad's married.
Yeah.
He did it, right? So
Right,
like
if he can do it.
there's all of that. Yeah, if he can do it, I can do it.
If he can do it, I can do it. Yeah, that's very true. I didn't think about that, right? Like part of that is him dealing with and understanding that dynamic in his father. Like there's some moments of that, like where he's getting an understanding of what his dad was like. I forget the scenes, but he's like talking with his mom about what his dad was like, asking her out, and like
The map.
that dynamic,
He made the map.
the map, like the map, right? That like helps him understand a little bit about
Yeah.
himself, and
Yeah.
in those areas, right? And this is all stuff that, like, to your point, Steve, is cool, and it fits in a story well, but it's tough to like see that happen at an educator level when we've only got students for a year, or we've got 200 students, and or even in college, right? Like those of us, like I'm teaching a class right now. I've got these students for a semester, 16 weeks of their life. And they probably won't have me again because I'm an adjunct, so I won't teach any other course. There's this dynamic where like we've got to also maybe put ourselves, take some of the pressure off, I think, sometimes too, in this dynamic where, like, because I feel like for teachers, no matter what level you're teaching or the dynamic you're teaching, right, whether it's K-12, you're in higher ed, I think if anybody has seen Robin Williams in Dead Poet Society, or like other like movies of teachers, we're gonna be that teacher, right? They're gonna be standing on the desks saying my captain, and it's gonna be amazing. Like we're teaching sometimes is being a small part of a person's larger life, right? And so like a lot of that, I think we need to take some of the pressure off to go like, we're not going to change every student's life, like and we may not ever see the impact that we have at different levels, and we might just be a small puzzle piece of a larger picture that impacts that student down the road, right? And I think accepting that and taking some of that pressure off would help us a little bit. I've seen too many teachers get like down on themselves about what they're doing, because like I think we come in sometimes with unrealistic expectations. We see a show like Ted Lasso, or we see things like that. We expect we're going to come in and just by implementing the right teaching practices, I'm going to overcome the system, and all these students are going to like love learning tomorrow. Like that's like some of our
Not gonna
perspective.
happen.
I
Yeah,
mean,
and
like
Ted.
sometimes.
Go ahead,
Oh,
Steve.
sorry, I was gonna say that like sometimes we get so bogged down of like the pacing, like, oh, we have so much to get through, right? Whether it's algebra or world history, whatever it is. But sometimes we don't kind of, Josh, to your point, step back and be like, are kids even smiling in my classroom? Are they able to just be themselves a little bit, right? And the last episode I was on with you guys, like I kind of talked about that, like just building healthy culture in your room where students aren't afraid to tell you a joke, an appropriate one, but a joke.
Yeah.
And so, and,
Yeah.
and that can be really hard though, because like there's this like demand, I guess, of like, you got to get to the end of the book, or you got to hit all of your essential standards, all those benchmarks, right? But I think it is healthy to just like say, no, 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 no. I'm going to take 10, 15 minutes. We're going to do a social emotional check-in. We're going to have
Yep.
a off,
Yep.
kind of off task, purposeful conversation about something else. Just that little bit to, again, just making everything feel in your classroom a little normal. Because our kids right now, they need some normal in their life. They need to be kids sometimes.
Yeah.
Preach.
That's
Preach.
good. Yeah, I think that element of like it may be the smallest part you can do as a teacher is just find a way to like to build that normal into your classroom, and to build into your flow in class a way to um help students be themselves in the classroom and have fun in the classroom, and be seen to a certain extent from you as a teacher, however that looks like, the of like being able to be a part of that, right? And like that small part maybe at least gives them a place to be able to be themselves in the classroom. And I think if we can come to the perspective with that understanding, right, and seeing them as people coming in and allowing for some of that space, those small things will at least help maybe build a healthier dynamic that allows you as the teacher and the students to engage with each other at a level. And it's not necessarily you're not going to change everything. We're not going to, they're not going to, most students will not have an epiphany in your classroom about all the trauma that they have had from their parents, or start drawing a map to ask a girl out in the middle of your classroom and everything will be fixed. Like there's that's probably not going to happen, right?
At that point, I'd be more impressed than anything. I'm like, serious project-based learning going on right now. Like,
yeah.
I see you using Cami to organize over there. We love it.
Yeah. Steve will be teaching and a student in class will like ask out his future wife using Cami, and Steve will be like, success.
I did it.
It's over. I've arrived.
Amazing.
Yeah. But I feel like that might be the place to start, right? Because I think that gets to some of what you're talking about, Steve. It's like we do have a system that doesn't necessarily encourage people to be seen as people in the classroom, whether student or adult, right? And so like maybe some of that is like trying to figure out how do we do that in a classroom and try to be that, like, and that might be the small starting point, maybe. As a way to move forward.
Something I don't know, just like the work I do at my university and talking with my student teachers and their cooperating teachers, like the big conversation, especially this moment, like post COVID, right, where they were learning at home in isolation. And then I'm speaking generally, right? So like whatever sample size I am with what I'm seeing is there's a lot of just direct instruction, like lecture-based learning.
Yeah.
At least in my area, where like the things that I felt worked well for me, like cooperative learning, collaboration, the 4 C's, right? Like the 4 C's, getting that creativity, communication, collaboration, right? And there's not that like critical thinking. I was like, what's the fourth one? I was like, what? There's not that going on. I was like, I'm dropping words, but then I can't think of the last one. Last two.
I'm about to just use every C word that exists.
Not every C word. But,
yep. Moving forwards.
Yeah, so it's still getting students learning in isolation, even after this moment of the pandemic. And I think that's like a larger conversation for, I don't know, my state, nationally. Like what can we do to try to get more of a buy-in to get students working together more, feeling like they're a part of something bigger than themselves, and not feel like they're isolated, having to memorize a test on their own, right? And really bringing in like the authenticity into the classroom as well, right? Like those real world problems. And that goes down a big rabbit hole, right? But to me, that's part of how you can humanize it.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, we've come to the decision: burn down the system, and
start
Will's
fresh.
I love this. I'm glad I went that direction.
What I'm hearing is you guys pouring the gasoline. I have the match. Let's go.
Yeah, like I hear what you're saying though, right? Is like how do we get more buy-in into like getting that collaborative environment and allowing students to like engage with each other and be a part of that area. And again, like we're talking to our experiences, right? So like I'm sure there's other people who've had different experiences out there of what they're looking at. But I know in the college environment, in our environment we're in too, that's a big thing, right? Is that like lecture is still very pervasive. And I'll be like upfront, I'm not an anti-lecture person. I think like there's dynamics to lecture done well and not done for an hour and a half straight, that like can be very beneficial. But like trying to figure out those areas. And I think some of it might be like just starting as best you can in your small classroom you have, being able to like do that at whatever level you can start to do it at, right? Like it starts small and being able to show that area. But like, that's one of my thoughts.
I think that from what I've experienced so far, kind of being at CAMI and kind of more on the teacher training side of things, is I've always heard like, oh yeah, get students to collaborate, think, pair, share, creativity, all this stuff. But the thing that never gets like coupled with that, and why some teachers just avoid it altogether, is, well, how do you examples? I want examples of how that's done from a classroom management standpoint. Because a lot of teachers are like, oh yeah, if I have all my students talk and collaborate in that way, it's a madhouse, which that might be true. And I had a conversation with one of my student teachers recently about that. Is like, he took my guidance, is like, he started doing more collaborative stuff with tech tools, and it blew up in his face. Just to be frank, hopefully he's not listening. But it didn't blow up in his face, but it didn't go as controlled as he's used to. So then he felt like, I can tell he was a little flustered, and I'm like, don't worry about me. I just want to make sure you're okay. Like, because I always tell student teachers, I'm like, you need to do the things that also don't drive yourself nuts. That's just the reality of it. And so the thing that doesn't get, I want people to be out there, right, talking how we collaborate, how we use communication, how we teach these things, entrepreneurship, all these things. But what does that look like from a classroom management standpoint? Because if you provide more clear answers and procedures of how to do that, my feeling is that there'll be a little bit more of a buy-in, especially for ones that are already kind of skeptical of moving in that direction.
That's true. I'm curious, Steve, from your perspective, obviously you've done a lot of like training of teachers and things like that. What have you found some ways to do that with people? Like, have there been some ways, examples you've used that have helped get buy-in? Or is this a current thought that we're all kind of thinking, or like, cool, we're going to leave, we're going to go try something a little bit different. But I'm curious, I'm curious if you've seen from your own perspective stuff that's maybe helped in that area. Because I get your point, right? Because I've been in a situation where like one, I'm teaching a full semester for the first time in a little while, so I've finally gotten to like try some things that I keep telling people to try that I haven't tried in a bit, and
Mhm.
and it's it's different when you get into the live environment and you try to do some different things, you try to figure that out. And I've had things
Yeah.
that have worked really well, and I've had stuff that's like, cool, that backfired horribly. I'm not that did not go well at all. I don't know what I did wrong, but it did not happen. But I've had similar professors and things like that where I've been same thing, trying to get them to buy in on that idea. Is like, well, that's nice, but like, how do I do that? Like, what does that look like? So I'm curious, have you found some stuff you've thrown out to people that you're like, this is like an example of what I would do or how I do it, and that has really helped people?
I I saw I saw a lot of success with that when I was still teaching full time at the high school level. When I'd be like, "Oh, they're like, Steve, how do you do a Socratic seminar?" I'm like, "Come watch, come watch,"
Yeah.
and or be, be- because sometimes it's hard to explain when you're like, "Well, how do you do it?" I'm like, that would take like all day, like just showing them, like the actual
Right.
like with real students, them
Yeah,
watching me,
yeah.
like, "Hey, this is how I structure it. This is my demeanor. This is my procedure for all of it." Um, and so like to me, that was like the most beneficial part of the pandemic because in the pandemic, it wasn't like, oh, I have to walk all the way across campus. Like, no, I'm just going to jump on Microsoft Teams and just go catch Steve's class. So then they were
Right.
watching, like a few would come in and just watch me do things like using a tech tool collaboratively, setting like digital procedures, but then having that conversation with them was like, that procedure doesn't have to change once we're in person. It doesn't have
Yep.
to.
What
Especially
we use to deliver it, maybe.
Yeah.
right, but, like, it's like,
Right.
at a certain level, though, if it's doing more than just replacing paper and it's being done transformatively, that's a reason to use
Yeah.
it, right?
Do it. Yeah. Do it
And
there.
so, yeah, I and with what I'm doing now, like, it's a lot of virtual training. There is some
Mhm.
in-person stuff. When I am in person on behalf of Cami, it's like total slay. It's like I'm doing like they're my students. They're my students. I have different like ways of like getting them in the jigsaw method, right? And doing different things that way. Um, Virtually, it's nice when I have other chameleons in the room with me being my fake honorary students, right? Like if I can get like a Sophie and a few others in the room, be like, "Hey, you're just gonna be the worst student
It's
possible,
always good to have a
and let me
plant.
just show you." Yeah, just be that person right now, and then I will show everyone. It's all about showing, right? And there's
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
much like articles, blogs, there's research, and all of that is good. But like sometimes the practicality of it is like I need to just see what this looks like. That is, it's kind of like what they say, the best PD is the one down the hall. Like, and I'm
Right.
still a firm believer of that. Just because like seeing it in action with real students in a real context, that
Yeah.
that's game. That's gold. It's gold.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. I like that note of like really at the end of the day, like trying to find ways to connect people with live examples of that happening. Whether and the most ideal being like in an actual classroom of somebody who's been trying to do that or doing that, or yourself if you're training teachers and you're also in the classroom, being able to bring them in those areas. I also like that alternative that like if you can't, because I've been in that space, right, where like you can't always get that when you're trying to train people or you're trying to do things. So like I also like this idea of like I've actually not done this, so I like this idea of like plant students, basically like try to show them an example of it and get like somebody else to come in and be like the worst student in the classroom.
Hey, person in the third row, could you ask this really bad question today, please? I'd love
Yeah,
to
like-
address this
like-
question.
Well, even like if you did something like I'm thinking like Will and I have gone in and talked in classes before and we've done something like that.
Yeah.
Like literally just having somebody come in and be like, listen, I want you to just be like I want you to do these things during the class. If you
Come
could.
in and
Like, that would
be
be great.
obnoxious.
Like, here's your checklist of how to be the worst student possible. Could you attempt to do this at every turn? and we will see how this goes.
It's like inviting a bull into a china shop, just
Well, if you want to show people how to protect China when there's a bull in a china shop, invite the bull into the china shop.
That's right. That's right.
That's a horrible analogy because everything's going to go bad. We need to work on a better analogy. Oh man.
This is fantastic. I mean, this is why we do the podcast. This is why we did Ted Lasso, because there's just so much rich stuff we can pull out of not only the analogies and the metaphors of characters and the narrative, but like these are practical teaching tips, folks. And I think that this is not only SEL, you mentioned that, I think it's trauma informed pedagogy. Like I think there's some really holistic approaches in all of this to how we reach the little humans, and if you're adult education, the big humans that are in your classrooms. And
some adults are little humans, including myself.
That's my bad, dude. I got you. Reach
some
the humans of all sizes.
Yes.
Yeah. Not all of us do. Some of us still use step stools. It's fine. It's all good.
Amazing. Thank you for joining us, Steve. Again, we just love having you on the podcast. You bring such a wonderful presence. Josh and I are going to wrap up here in just a few minutes, I think, but can't wait to have you on for whatever's next. Maybe it's going to be the Star Wars series for Ted. For
yeah. No, if that goes down,
you guys go to college. I like this idea. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm all about this.
I'm there for that. Yeah, I will be there for that.
Only if we all have lightsabers.
I'm gonna need a lightsaber. I don't have a lightsaber.
Yeah, fine. I'm fine with that. This seems great. Jedi robes and lightsabers. Yeah. That's what. Yeah, it's business expense right there.
I can just see his wife. What's this $3,000 charge for a lightsaber? It's business.
Don't worry about it.
No, it's fine. Yeah, don't worry about it. It's for the galaxy, honey.
These are not the lightsabers you're looking for.
Yeah. Do you want the galaxy to fall to evil? I didn't think so. $3,000 is a small price for the safety of all man. It's fine.
Oh man.
Well, that was one attempt at concluding the interview, and we'll just go for one more. But yes, if I'll put you two together, you figure out the Star Wars series, and I'll show up and ask the dumb questions. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Steve. We'll wrap here in just a second.
Whew. Okay, that was an experience. Steve, you never disappoint, man. When you come on, you have so much knowledge to share. And just when I don't think other people can nerd out more than Will and I'm reminded that there's a reason Will and I love talking to Steve.
I'm trying to think. I don't yet have any Ted Lasso tattoos, so he is winning in his nerd. It's true. He's got Star Wars tattoos, so he's got me.
I have a Star Wars tattoo, but I won't tell you where. No, that's not true. I don't have a Star Wars tattoo. That's a lie.
So.
Yeah. So Steve, this was great. I think what's interesting about this Ted Lasso thing that we've been trying is like where we're never quite sure where it's going to go, because it's always a mixture of like us just nerding out about Ted Lasso and then like trying to bring it back to education. That's basically been the Ted Lasso Goes to College series at this point. And but what I think
I want to talk about Ted, and also
so how do we make that happen? Yeah, like how do we do that? But with that said, I think what's really interesting that came out of the conversation with Steve, with Nate, is just like how important it is to figure out ways to humanize our students a bit more in our teaching and our classroom practices, but yet also accepting like we're not going to be able to do that like entirely. Like we are limited on what we can do, and even if there was no system that we work under and everything was hunky-dory and we could do whatever we want, at the reality at the end of the day, like it's still not going to go perfect, right? And we still only have our students for an isolated period of time. And so I think it's a combo of like finding small ways to do that, to humanize students, to provide ways for them to collaborate, have fun, to find people who are doing that and learn from them and try to figure out what ways work for us and what we do them. Doing those in small ways, but accepting that like we can only do so much as a teacher, right? And like
Right.
accepting that and moving forward with that and just doing our best, right? Even in Ted Lasso, we didn't get to mention this with Steve, but like even in the Ted Lasso series, right? And like what happens in that, like Ted's just trying his best in some cases, right? As somebody who's
Right.
working at it. And I think like that's something we could take away and learn as we're thinking about how we deal with this and what we do.
Well, and part of that, dude, is giving yourself permission, right, to know what you're good at doing and lean in there. Like I think that there's a lot happening in the world today that says a teacher, and this is pros and cons, but a teacher has to be everything. A teacher has to be everything to every student. It's like that's that's a beautiful sentiment. I'd love that to be practical, but it's not practical. You know, not every teacher is going to reach every student, and not every student is ready to be reached. Right? There's tons of things that go into that relationship between teacher and learner. So, getting comfortable with what you are good at, with what you are, with what you can accomplish, getting comfortable there, and then getting good at that. Like you hear Steve talk about what he's doing now with adult learners, right? People who are subscribing to Cami, and he's helping them get familiar with the platform, how to teach with it. Like he's taking some of those principles that we're working with his teenagers, middle school, high school, whatever, and he's doing that with 40, 50, 60-year-olds across the nation. Like he's taking those skills, the things that he is good at, he's just reinforcing it and doing it in a new context. That's a great demonstration. I'd love to encourage all of us to just take that. I think that permission, but also then that that focus into the thing that we're excellent at doing. Just become more excellent at doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree. Right. Like I think there's a lot of pressure that's put on teachers, both from themselves and in general, and even from institutions, right? Like if we go back to higher ed, even like in K-12 is this way too, we see this happen where like there's a lot of pressure that's put on teachers for what they're doing. And I think at a certain level, we have to accept that we can only do so much and just try our best in those areas. And that was encouragement to me, right? Like I've been teaching this semester, and like Will knows this, right? We're split across a lot of things between the podcast, other stuff Will and I are doing. Both Will and I have day jobs, plus I'm also teaching. Like, and I have to accept that like I can only do so much. I think like I put a lot of pressure on myself coming into the class to like I've got to do all these things because I keep telling people how they should teach, both on the podcast and like in my day job. And like so part of me is like I have to do this perfectly. No teacher is ever going to do that. Nobody's ever going to do that. And so we've got to find time to allow ourselves some space to just do the best we can and find places to prioritize how we can make students how we can build students up, how we can give them opportunities to take ownership of what they're doing and be themselves in the classroom. And that small stuff will go a long way, I think, based on what we're talking about here, right? And that's one of the takeaways I got from this, is that those are some of the things we could look to do. So that is Ted Lasso Goes to College part, whatever we're on at this point. That is I think this is 4. Yeah, well, I like what point whatever we are on at this point. It really rolls off the tongue, if you will. Clearly. Next week, episode 130. It's crazy. It's our big 130th episode. Will and I have decided we're just going
those 130ths that we all celebrate.
I've decided we're going to celebrate each episode as a milestone. Like that's going to be our new thing.
We're still here.
Yeah, it's going to be great. So anyway, we continue the Ted Lasso Goes to College series. I know you're thinking, can they give us any more about Ted Lasso? And the answer is one more episode. Yes, we can. The next episode 130 is going to be the finale of the Ted Lasso Goes to College series. We are joined by another Illingworth next week. There are more of them. I know. It's unexpected. You thought Will was the only one. You would be wrong. The great Dr. Charles Illingworth is going to be joining us next week again to talk about the one, the only Ted himself. That's right. The final episode, we're going to be breaking down Ted and taking a look at what we can learn about education. There's some cool thoughts coming from that episode. I'm excited for you guys to hear it. There's some weird directions that we go There are rabbit holes upon rabbit holes, as any episode with 2 Illingworths would be, but it is a fantastic one. So you're going to check it out. The End of Our Ted Lasso Goes to College series releases next week on episode 130. Reminder, you can connect with us on Twitter or YouTube at High Tech Podcast is the handle that you can find us at. You can also email us at inbox@hightechpod.us. If you've thoughts about the episode, you want to share some stuff with us, you want to be on the podcast, you're like, I heard Steve, that would be fun to be him on the podcast. Like, not actually Steve, don't come on pretending to be Steve. If that's your pitch, don't do that. But like, if you want to come on and talk about something on the podcast,
Wow,
we're more than happy to have you join us. So hit us up at inbox@hightechpod.us. And also remember, we have a website, hightechpod.us. Every episode has an episode page. You know, check that out. We give you more information and fun things to talk about on that episode, so you want to check that out. Again, thank you for joining us for another week as we continue to learn what it looks like to harness Ted Lasso and technology in the classroom, whether online or in person. We appreciate it. Barbecue sauce.
barbecue sauce.